Boomers keep yelling and screaming, "Get off my lawn," or "Pull yourself up by your bootstraps," like me.
And millennials keep crying, "Well, no one's had it harder than us." Never mind the 300,000 years of history before them.
But Gen Xers, we don't get the clicks. We get forgotten. And you know what? We're kind of okay with that, except that this can be a real problem for us.
This is Queer Money, brought to you by Optimize Investment Partners Portugal Golden Opportunities Fund. More on that in a minute. And today we're talking about why gay Gen Xers and our retirements are harder than it looks and what we can do about it.
So do us a favor here. Give us an eye roll emoji in the comments if you are tired of watching boomers and millennials duking it out and the press pandering to both of them. Then let us know in the comments which challenges we've missed that you are uniquely facing as you head into retirement as a Gen Xer.
Because this episode could have been 3, 4, 5 hours long. So David, what is the most Gen X thing about you?
I think probably that when I was a kid, I had a banana seat bite. Orange. I remember riding it down the street one day for whatever, I was wearing flip-flops and one of my flip-flops came off, and stupid me, I put my foot on the ground to stop my bike, and it took the skin from underneath my toenail on my big toe and ripped it back to the top of my foot.
Oh.
And I, of course, dropped my bike, ran into the house screaming, blood was everywhere, and my parents didn't even take me to the hospital for that.
That's the most Gen X thing
That's
about
the
you.
Gen X part about it.
Figured out. I would say the most Gen X thing about me, especially as we're in semi-retirement, the little bit of Fs I had left have all disappeared.
Bye.
There's just none left. So
No Fs anymore.
So when the millennials complain about our intro, sorry.
Weh.
All right, we're going to be sharing 7 points here with you. But as we said in the intro, this show could be like 3 or 5 hours long. So definitely share anything that we've missed. But we're just going to cover 7 here. Wait to the end because we're going to share 2 that are unique to LGBTQ plus people, whereas the first 5 are more broadly applicable to our entire generation. So the first one we have for you here is that Gen X kind of got caught in the pension to 401k swap, where there was a time period where nobody really knew what to do. Nobody knew how to teach employees about how to manage their 401ks, and employees didn't really know where to go to find information. So we were kind of all sort of flying blind. While boomers were more likely to have defined benefit pensions, meaning that they had employer managed lifetime income, Gen X entered the workforce as pensions faded away and sort of the DIY of your 401k sort of took over. So we inherited more responsibility plus more market risk, and we had to then figure out how to fund our own retirements, which to me, it sounds a lot like, hey, just figure out how to get in the front door your own, make your own dinner, and we'll be home later.
Yeah, exactly. Latchkey kids. I think one of the other things that's really important to point out here is that unlike many millennials and Gen Z, companies back then were not automatically enrolling their employees into their employer-sponsored retirement plans. And now many, actually, I think it's now a law where companies are required to enroll you. I don't know if that took place in 26 or maybe that's coming up in 27. But anyway, there have been lots of companies that have automatically enrolled their employees, whereas back then, companies were not in doing that, and they weren't even providing guidance, or the plan administrators, the companies that manage these 401ks, they weren't sending people out to teach people about how to invest in their 401k. All right, the second thing that we're going to talk about here is how many Gen Xers started working on the heels of the double dip recession and then the occurrence of Black Monday. Now, a lot of millennials like to talk about how they entered the workforce during the housing crisis and then the Great Recession. Well, very similar to that, there were 2 major consecutive recessions that occurred in the early 1980s, often referred to as the double dip recession. This was driven by high inflation and tight monetary policy, during which times companies really didn't want to hire people. And the first one was brief. It did last 6 months. It was a 6-month downturn in 1980 from January to July. But then that was followed by an even more sustained recession that took place between July of 1981 and November of 1982. And then just a few years later, on October 19th, 1987, the market plunged 22.6% in a single day. That is still the biggest percentage drop in history. And one of the things I vividly remember about this time period, the early 80s, was I was in junior high and early high school, and I remember walking home from school, walking through the neighborhood and just seeing so many homes that had signs on them saying that they were a HUD home that was for sale sale. And what was going on is that there were literally millions of people who were being evicted or foreclosed on during this recession. And so there were a lot of kids who were either getting ready to go off to college or maybe entering the workforce during a time period when maybe their families had basically had their homes foreclosed on and had been kicked out of their homes. So it was very similar to what millennials experienced during the housing crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my mom and dad sitting, my sister and I, down on the couch and having the conversation of times are hard right now, so just suck it up.
Yeah,
it's
a lot of
GenXer.
Allowances were tight
to non-existent.
Very rarely did we ever go out to eat especially during that time period.
All right, so we don't want to just present problems to you. We'll continue that here in a moment. We also want to present some solutions to you. GenX can take care of this. No one's home. We'll let ourselves in. We're out too late. The news has to remind mom and dad they have kids and they should probably go look for us.
Where are your children at?
We don't complain. We manage. So we got this. But let's be real. The math is ugly. In the Schroeder 2025 U.S. retirement survey, Gen X respondents said that they expect to retire with a little over $711,000, but believe that they need a little bit more than $1.1 million, which is roughly a $404,000 gap. So David's going to walk us through both scenarios using the Happy Gay retirement calculator with the drawdown that he added to give you a flavor of what both retirements look like with both incomes or both net worths. And don't forget, the Happy Gay retirement calculator with the drawdown is available to you in the Career Money Retirement Vault. We also provide this to folks when we walk them through the retirement readiness chat that's available to all of our listeners, viewers, and subscribers. So we're going to toss it off to David.
All right, so let's take a look at both of these examples and what they look like in the Happy Gay retirement calculator and really what it looks like when this individual starts withdrawing money from their retirement accounts based on whether or not they saved $711,000 versus $1.1 million. So I have two calculators open here. One of them is going to be based on the person who saved $711, and the one is going to be based on the person who saved $1.1 million. You notice that everything else about these calculators is exactly the same. I've chosen that this individual has a happy retirement life, which basically means they're spending 100% of the current lifestyle or living expenses that they have today. I have chosen that they have a current living expenses or overall amount of money that they need of $77,000. Their income is $77,000. Now, the reason why I've chosen that $77,000 amount is because of a Stanford study that was done that showed that Americans who are earning roughly $77,000 seem to be at the point where if they make less money than that, they're struggling and they're worried about money. If they make more money than that, it doesn't really seem to add any value or more happiness to their life or less stress to their life. Now, granted, I understand if you're living in New York or San Francisco or an expensive city, $77,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these numbers here. But that $77,000 is going to stay constant for both of these examples. And the other thing I think to keep in mind is this is a national average, right? This is not one specific city. So we're going to look at the calculators. Again, I have plugged into this one here. This is an individual who has a retirement amount of money of $711,771. So I've also plugged in that they don't have any further until they reach retirement age or years for their money to grow, because this is what the study actually had shown, that Gen Xers would be retiring with around $711,000. So let's take a look at what this looks like in the drawdown portion of the calculator. Again, there are some constants that I'm holding here. I have the individual's name, which I just chose my own, that they are retiring at 65. The reason I chose 65 is because that seems to be a very typical retirement age for individuals is 65. I've also chosen that Social Security would start when they reach 67. This is full retirement age. Obviously, you can take money sooner than that and get a lower amount, or you can delay up until 70 and get a larger amount. I've also held that this constant here, that the individual is going to get around $2,200 a month from Social Security. That will factor into the amount of money that they actually get in Social Security or what their total income is when we look at the drawdown portion of the calculator. I've also held study that they are a moderate investor. And the reason I chose a moderate investor is as we reach retirement age, many of us shift from being aggressive to being moderate investors. This means a return of around 7.5%. That's a typical return for a 60-40 portfolio. 60-40 portfolio is basically considered to be a moderate portfolio. 60% of your assets are investment assets in equities, 40% are in fixed income. And so that's where we get that 7.5%. Now let's take a look at the drawdown calculator for this example. Remember, this is an individual who started off with $711,000. So the first year, the year that they reach 65, they withdraw $77,000 because that's the amount of money that they need. Their total income that they need for the year is $77,000. And so that immediately starts reducing their investment balance, right? And you notice here for the first 2 years that they are fully pulling all of that money, the money that they need, out of their investments. And remember that number, that amount of money that they need is indexed to inflation. I've chosen a 3% inflation rate, which is a little bit higher than normal or what the Federal Reserve would like, but we know what's happened recently with inflation, so I wanted to put it at a slightly higher amount. I've also indexed the increase in Social Security to that same 3%. We know that that rarely happens, that they actually do match inflation, but I wanted to keep it constant for this particular example. Now, what do you see happening here with the investment balance for this individual who has $711,000? Remember, a lot of us would say, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, what happens year after year after year? What do you see happening to their investment balance? It continues to drop, doesn't it? And the reason for this is they are pulling more money out of their retirement account than their retirement account is generating. And so their retirement account balance is starting to drop, even though they are starting to receive more and more money from Social Security to match their total income, which also continues to go up. So how long does this money last? How long can they continue to withdraw money from their retirement accounts? Well, let's take a look here. You notice when they reach 84, this is the last year that they actually have money to withdraw, or a significant amount of money to withdraw from their retirement accounts so that they can add that to Social Security and live the lifestyle that they are accustomed to. So this individual, when they're 85, starts to run out of money. And just imagine what they're thinking is during these years, during the years when they're 81, 82, 83, and they're seeing their retirement account balance drop significantly, especially if this individual is a healthy individual. And we know that with healthcare changes, individuals are living longer. This individual in their later retirement years is probably going to be starting to get very nervous about outliving their money. This is the bag lady syndrome that many of us are worried about. The confidence of being able to outlive our money is something that a lot of people in our community have told us that they are very concerned about. Now let's take a look at the scenario of somebody who has $1.1 million. So I have basically plugged in everything the same here other than that 1.1 million or $1,116,000 here. So let's jump over to the drawdown and notice here, this individual, again, same, everything else held constant. What is going on with their retirement balance? They're still living off of that $77,000 as their starting amount and indexing that to inflation. And they're also getting Social Security, which is indexed to inflation. They're pulling money out of their retirement accounts, but look at what's happening to their balance. What do you see happening? Their balance is actually increasing every year because they are not spending more money than their account is generating. When they get to 84 and their counterpart who saved $711,000 is starting to worry about running out of money, they're seeing their balance ever increasing. As a matter of fact, this individual could live to 100 and still not run out of money. Imagine what this individual would be able to do with their lifestyle as they saw this amount of money increasing. They could actually start to withdraw even more money from their retirement accounts and potentially be living a fabulous life, especially those latter years of their life when they may need more assistance and more care, or may want to live in a slightly more comfortable environment.
All right, back to our litany of problems. Our third point here is that Gen X is carrying more consumer debt baggage into our peak saving years. Credit really expanded fast as Gen Xers entered adulthood, and many are now saving for retirement while they're servicing high interest rate debt. Bankrate's 2026 reporting shows 53% of Gen Xers holding credit card debt month over month, and Experian-based reporting summarized by Investopedia pegs Gen X with the highest average credit card debt at around $9,600. That's a bit. Debt payments compete directly with catch-up contributions and late-stage retirement savings momentum, even as we're scrambling to save for retirement. And this is definitely something that Dave and I have been skilled at with helping people pay off.
Definitely. And I think one of the other things to point out here is that Gen X as a generation has the highest average student loan debt balance compared to all other generations.
What?
Which I think is surprising because so many people talk about how millennials are struggling with this high amount of student loan debt. But at the same time, Gen Xers have on average more student loan debt than millennials do. And I think that the important thing here is that a lot of Gen Xers may be feeling the pressure to not only have their own student loan debt, but they're taking on student loan debt for their children.
Well, yeah, this is a talking point that we ended up cutting out of the show, which I guess we're adding back, is that Gen Xers are the first generation to really take care of their children's student loan debt, but we're also taking care of mom and dad because the boomers aren't necessarily flush with retirement money, or they need healthcare, nursing care and whatnot that is being supplemented by some of the incomes of Gen Xers. So we're kind of that sandwich generation. So we're just taking it at both ends.
All right, coming in at number 4, and thanks for that crude comment there, John. There was the dot-com crash. Many Gen X investors were concentrated in tech stocks, including companies like Cisco, which amazingly is back in the news again these days, Intel, Yahoo, and AOL. Those last two, some of you may not even know what they are.
Just a shout out if you have an AOL email address, because we know some of you do. You're on our email list.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of folks held these stocks in their employee 401k accounts, their employee sponsored accounts. And so when the market tanked, so did their 401ks. In addition, a lot of folks, Gen Xers, were already working in these tech companies. There was this kind of tech explosion happening in the late 90s, early 2000s. But then when the dot-com bubble popped, Gen Xers were oftentimes the ones, because they were younger, who ended up losing their jobs. And on top of that, not only did they lose their jobs, a lot of them lost a lot of money in their 401k accounts. And this triggered a lot of Gen X layoffs during this time period. I know that there were a lot of other people who were being laid off, but there were roughly about 2.7 million jobs that were lost during this time period. And that really hit our generation hard, especially with the potential for investing.
Yeah, so let's put this into some context. That kind of a loss at such a critical moment in your career really created a dearth of of years for your portfolio to compound. For example, Gen Xer had $50,000 invested in the stock market in 1999, which is probably a little bit overweighted in tech. After the dot-com crash, they would have lost 50% of their portfolio, or that $50,000 by 2002, which is a loss of $25,000. So they only had $25,000 left between then and now for that to compound. So what is the opportunity cost, or what is the missed potential of growth from that drop in their portfolio? By 2026, if they had averaged an 8% return over those years, they would have missed out on potential $158,500. 8% is quite common, very possible. If they would have had a 10% return over those years, that missed potential would have been about $246,000. So nearly $250,000 that many of us lost from our portfolios because of that crash alone.
Yeah, and I do remember that during this time period, these drops in the market, this is a great time. I'm speaking specifically to millennials and Gen Z. This is a great time to actually catch up when it comes to your portfolio. John and I were fortunate that during the crash of 2008 and 2009, we had just finished paying off all of our debt. And so we had about $1,000 extra every month. And instead of inflating our lifestyle, we chose to put that money into our 401k accounts, which is part of the reason why we have been able to semi-retire early.
Yeah, market dips are yard sales for stocks.
All right, coming in at number 5 is that the Great Recession hit Gen X at the worst possible time. So let's look at this in a little bit of chronology here. We have the dot-com crash in the late 90s. We have 9/11 in the early 2000s. Then there was the Iraq War. Then there was the Afghanistan War. All of these things were followed by recessions and market volatility. So for many Gen Xers, this was a really scary time to invest. There was an aversion to investing, especially with money that we could use other places, right? Money that was coming into us through our paychecks, not going into our our 401ks. We were looking at that money and saying, I'm going to spend that money because investing doesn't seem like it's the greatest thing to do. So all that was happening. And finally, then the housing crisis follows. Then there's the Great Recession after that. And so just when some of us were starting to feel comfortable again, maybe with investing, maybe feeling comfortable about our careers, maybe buying our first homes, boom, we get hit with another financial crisis. And Northwestern Mutual has cited this time period that Gen Xers had their median net worth fall sharply. And they're oftentimes referencing this as a long-lasting hit to our financial trajectory.
Yeah, and to your point about just buying our first homes, this is in part why Gen X is more likely to be still paying off those big mortgages, even while we're trying to ramp up investments into our retirement savings, as well as we're taking care of mom and dad. As I said earlier, I think at this point in my parents' life, they were paying off their mortgage. A lot of boomers, I think, were finished paying off their mortgages, and there was an ethos back in the day, don't even consider retiring until your mortgage is paid off. Well, that's really not an option for a lot of Gen Xers because we have decades still on our mortgages to pay off. And of course, I know people are a little bit more mobile than they used to be, so there are some extenuating circumstances, but it's still a challenge for our generation. And then as we were recovering from the Great Recession, not long after that, we had COVID, right? So what we're all experiencing right now as investors is a shift away from the market. So we had the US market, which is another challenge for those of us who are invested primarily in the United States. So what's a possible solution to that? Our suggestion is to check out the Optimized Investment Partners Portugal Golden Opportunities Fund, which gets you Portugal's Golden Visa, future EU passports for you and your family, and may yield you better returns globally than what you're getting now, especially if it follows the last couple of years of performance. That's wealth, mobility, and a Mediterranean lifestyle, all optimized. Tap the link in the video description to see how it all works. And now for the gay stuff. Number 6 is unique for gay Gen Xers. Gay Gen Xers are the first generation to survive into retirement. In the 1980s and early 1990s, HIV/AIDS was widely perceived as a death sentence for many of us. For many gay men, especially those coming out during that period, the expectation of living into older age was just uncertain. By 1995 in the United States, 1 in 9 gay men had been diagnosed with AIDS, 1 in 15 had already died, and about 10% of gay men had aged between the ages of 25 and 44 had died from AIDS-related causes.
So for young gay men at that time, this created a cultural environment where their future was really uncertain. In that environment, many gay men adopted a carpe diem mindset or a live for today mindset. Travel now, love now, spend now, experience life right now.
Because tomorrow we may die. And we literally had this conversation with a bunch of gay Gen Xers in Ajijic, Mexico a couple weeks ago. For a gay Gen X man coming out in the late 80s or early 90s, retirement planning often felt irrelevant or surreal. Like, why bother?
Right.
This means gay Gen X is still the first cohort to survive HIV, the first large cohort, I should say, and the first to face retirement planning after decades of crises. And we don't really have mentors to look up to because we lost a whole generation of gay men.
Well, and to be clear, there are a lot of boomers who made it into retirement, but as we have seen, that a lot of gay boomers are individuals who either stayed in the closet for quite a number of years or were not as visible in the community. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about, not having the kind of mentors, because it was a little bit easier for them to maintain a lifestyle while staying in the closet. But here are some common psychological patterns that still linger regarding money for our generation of gay men. We have shortened time horizons. Many gay men, even today, they think that they don't need to worry about retirement because they're going to die young, which we know for a fact is not the case for a lot of us. The other thing is that we are very present focused in our decision making. We're all about bottomless brunches or Gucci boots now and not about planning for 20 years from now. As a matter of fact, we just had a call with one of our clients and he talked about his now or soon to be ex-husband literally didn't have a job for decades, in part because he was living it up and having a great lifestyle that his husband was supporting. Now, there's some other issues there, but it still speaks to this mindset of wanting to have fun right now.
Yeah, and then there's the common psychological challenge that many of us just don't have. We have lower expectations of aging. So we don't take care of our bodies necessarily the same way other generations or other demographics too. Yes, we're more likely to have bulging pecs and six-pack abs, but we're also considerably more likely to be smokers, drinkers, and heavy drug users. And then we have a greater emphasis on experiences now over assets. Besides having beautiful homes, we're not really accumulating assets the way we need to support the retirement that many of us say that we want to have.
Right. So for many gay men, we are the grasshopper and not the ant in Aesop's fable. All right, coming in at number Number 7, and our last one here, is that gay Gen Xers were part of the last workplace closeted generation. Most of our careers we were spent during a time period when being openly gay could cost you a job, could cost you a promotion, could cost you, in some cases, physical protection. And for many people, that meant that they stayed in the closet if they wanted to succeed, if they wanted to have a successful career, or if you couldn't do that, or you were outed by someone, oftentimes that meant that you maintained or stayed in very low level and low earning jobs.
Or you pursued a career where you didn't have to be concerned about that, but oftentimes those careers like bartending, waiting tables or whatnot didn't necessarily provide the income that we need today to be able to survive retirement tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. And we do know Supreme Court's Bostock versus Clayton County decision, that certainly has helped. But remember, that happened in 2020. Many gay Gen Xers were in their 50s when this happened. And when it comes to state level protections, that's a geographic lottery.
Yeah, of course, some of those protections, especially at the state level, especially over the last year, and especially for non-binary and trans folks, been slowly eroded. So kind of going back to that time, unfortunately.
If retirement feels harder for you as a gay Gen Xer or as just a Gen Xer, you're not imagining it. And if you're gay, you know that there's a whole nother layer to that. So if you look at your retirement account today and think, why does this feel so hard for us? Well, now you know.
But here's the good news. Gen X is also the most resilient generation when it comes to money. We've survived crashes, recessions, pandemics, discrimination, and a whole cultural shift on what retirement actually looks like, which means if any generation can rewrite the rules of retirement, it's us.
And we know that we could have shared another half dozen challenges here, but that would make this episode longer than what we usually like. So let us know what we've missed, especially the unique challenges that you are facing.
If you want to live up to this stereotype and take charge of your retirement, or simply have someone provide a second set of eyes on your retirement plan, click the link in the description to schedule a chat, and let's get you feeling confident about that fabulous retirement that you so desperately want. And then be sure you're subscribed to us on YouTube as well as Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because we're working on an episode to cover how and when to adjust your retirement portfolio in retirement.
If you love this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends who simply want to be able to retire. And until next time, stay fabulous. If you're scared about where and who you're going to retire with, check out this video on 7 living arrangements for retirement. Yes, the Golden Girls arrangement is an option.
And I'm retiring with this one.
Bye.